Hello again. I'm Paulo Shakarian, CEO and co-founder of CYR3CON. Thanks again for taking the time today. Got a really interesting topic for you. And that is, we're going to look at quantifying threats in our second part on risk assessment and vulnerability management. So reviewing the NIST standards around risk assessment, we're going to focus on item number 4 for today, assessing likelihood of threat. Now, the NIST CVSS scoring system is widely used in the industry to rank software vulnerabilities. And it is useful for things like compliance and policy, not so useful as a metric in terms of predicting threat activity. And here from this peer-reviewed study that we did a while back, we see the NIST CVSS scoring is hugging the bottom line, which is roughly no better than random guess in predicting which vulnerabilities will be exploited. And there's been actually several peer-reviewed studies that have shown this result. And we found in our discussions that most vulnerability management labs actually know this, so what did I do instead? Well, the first approach we've seen deals with threat levels. And the idea here is there is a level of threat associated with certain criteria for each vulnerability. So for instance, the top level might be an exploit in the wild. Then the next level may be if they know it's been used in a penetration testing framework, availability of proof of concept, so not quite deployed yet, but we think code is out there, and then just threat intelligence. And so this is very simple to implement, but the drawback is it's not granular. And it also doesn't account for things like, what if the threat intelligence source is talking about availability of the exploit in a private market and you don't actually have it, but there's some really good intel saying that hackers are getting ready to use it. Well, in this example, that's going to be prioritized much lower than it should be. And how do we overcome some of that? Well, this leads to the next approach, which is to use a weighting mechanism. And now you get a little more granular view because you're actually scoring the vulnerabilities. So here's an example of how that would work. Maybe for every exploit, you say add 100 points. Sometimes we see folks using multiplication factors here as well. Pen test module, maybe add a little bit less, some points for POC, some points for threat intelligence, and so forth. So this is also fairly straightforward to implement. But at the same point, it's very difficult to come to a consensus internally on how to add these points. And honestly, this method, even though it might look very quantifiable, the points aren't being associated with any actual historical data about previous threats that arose. And so it's not really quantifying threats in the way that you'd want to do from a risk management standpoint. So this leads to the third approach, and that's to use machine learning. And now here you have a model that's going to give you a likelihood of exploitation. So how do you get that model? Well, first, for older vulnerabilities, you take all the information, intelligence, exploits, and so on that you had ahead of time, and you put that in the database. And then two, using what's called a training algorithm, you create a machine learning based model that compares that database information to if there was an exploit or not actually employed in the wild for those vulnerabilities. And now you have a very accurate association from the intelligence to the probability of exploitation. And that model that captures that can then be used to predict if a new vulnerability will be exploited in the future. So this is going to be your most accurate method because it's basing the decisions on the data and not someone's intuition. But the drawback is it's difficult to implement. To do this right, you not only need folks trained in machine learning, but also you're going to have to do this model retraining process on a regular basis because aspects of the threat will change, aspects of what vulnerabilities get exploited will change, and so on. So at CyRating, we're actually providing a solution to approach 3 that absolves the vulnerability management team from having to do any machine learning work at all, but still reap all those benefits. So the CyRating score is the output of a machine learning model, and it's driven with threat intelligence that's stored in a database and also provided to the user. And the way this works is based on the threat intelligence, we are extracting indicators based on hacker content or their social structure, the metadata about the hacker communities, and information about the vulnerability itself. Then we, at a regular basis, create a model through a machine learning training algorithm, just as I described previously. And the output of that model is served to clients through an API and web-based user interface and designed to support various workflows. If you're interested in learning more, please go to CYR3CON.ai and you can find this report along with others available for download. Thank you.